Welcome into the Technical Area Preview Show. I'm Gino Ganello, and we're back with another preview show. Had the review show on YouTube already, talking about match week 3. Now we're getting into match week 4. Should be an exciting one. A lot of close ones, a lot of interesting matchups. As we go here into match week 4, start to learn a little bit more about all of these teams and start to realize which ones are, going to be near the top of the table, which ones are going to be surprise teams, and which ones aren't having great seasons and don't look like they're going to have great seasons the rest of the way. So things are starting to shape up here. We're starting to really get an understanding of these teams, and that's, when it really gets fun, when you really get to see what teams are doing, and then, creates more scenarios for upsets and stuff like that and shockers like we saw last week. So that's awesome too. But here we are, the preview show, week 4, and there's a lot to get to, so we might as well get right into it. A couple FA Cup games for some of these teams this past week. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as that may or may not have a factor in how they play this weekend. But before we get to that, let's get into our first game. That is 7:30 a.m. on Saturday Eastern Time here in the United States. And then, of course, it is the 12:30 game over there in England. Man United at Southampton. This is an interesting one. Now, Man United in their last 7 meetings versus Southampton haven't lost. They're 4-3-0, and then they only have 7 losses since the start of the Premier League versus Southampton. So, a lot of success against this Southampton team, and it makes sense. When the Premier League started, Man United was one of the best teams in the Premier League, and they held that dominating status until not too long ago, as the decade started. So things are changing a little bit now, and Man United has had some struggles, but Southampton, they aren't there. They're not that level, and they haven't been that level in a while. Ever since really, Liverpool went through a raid of all of their players and got all of their players. Southampton had some successful years in the middle of this decade, but nothing really fantastic over the last few years. After losing Van Dijk to Liverpool, that was pretty much really the downfall of them and the start of their downfall towards, a more bottom half of the table club. The last time Man United even lost to Southampton was back in 2016. But, these are pretty exciting matches most of the time. In the last 20 matches between these two teams, only 4 times has a team won by more than 1 goal. And then, obviously draws thrown in there. And most of those are coming back when United was really, really good in those early 2000 years. But let's focus on now. Let's focus on the here and now. And, I think the big thing to notice here is that Man United have not looked really good at all recently, falling to Crystal Palace at home for the first time in 20 years, drawing with Wolves in a game that they easily could have lost. It's not been good for them since that 4-0 win against Chelsea at home to start the season. But at the same time, Southampton isn't that great. Yes, they had the 2-0 win at Brighton last weekend, but we got to throw in the factor that Brighton did have a red card in that game pretty early, so that obviously adds to them scoring a couple goals there as well. And other than that, Southampton have lost 3-0 at Burnley and 2-1 at home versus Liverpool. I think this one, may be an interesting one because of how badly Man United have played. But I think in the end, we're going to see a Man United win. I can't really see any other result. Said the same thing last week, though, against Crystal Palace. But, at some point, Man United's got to pick it up. They want to, be real contenders in the Premier League, and this may have to be it. Moving on to, Aston Villa at Crystal Palace, right from Man United here to Crystal Palace. There's only been 14 meetings between these two clubs ever in the Premier League. Crystal Palace leads the series 5-4. They last played in 2016. Both coming off big upset wins. Aston Villa against Tottenham, not Tottenham, against Everton, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And Crystal Palace, as we just talked about, against Man United. This is a big chance for one of these teams to grab 3 points, obviously, at Crystal Palace, so they have a little bit of the edge here. Aston Villa started off with a couple of losses and then got the win at Everton. Crystal Palace drew with Everton and then beat Man United last week with a loss to Sheffield in between. I think this one ends in a draw. I just think that both these teams are pretty equal. I think that they'll compete with some of the better teams, but most of the time not get a win. But they both have the power on offense to put a goal or two in the back of the net. So I think this one ends in a draw because I think that Villa kind of has more firepower in that sense, and they can grab a goal on the road. Moving on here to Bournemouth at Leicester. This is also a 10 a.m. game. The one before the Aston Villa Crystal Palace was 10 a.m. Eastern time as well, 3 p.m. Over there in Britain. And this is this one will be at Leicester. Leicester leads the all-time series 7-5-5. Leicester's only win versus Bournemouth in PL history, though. They only have one win against Bournemouth in PL history, though. And that was last year at Bournemouth, 2-0. Otherwise, in their other 8 games in the Premier League, they're 1-5-2 against Bournemouth, which is a pretty interesting stat because Leicester have been pretty good, especially in that year where they won the Premier League title. You would have thought that they would have been a little bit better against Bournemouth, but only playing them 17 times all time, only 8 Premier League fixtures against each other. Excuse me. This is an interesting one. Bournemouth can be dangerous and can be a tough team to break down, but Leicester has looked very dangerous lately. They had the draw against Wolves, the draw against Chelsea, and then a win last week against Sheffield United, which an unbelievable goal to win that one. But Leicester is very dangerous, and at home, I have a hard time seeing them lose this one. So I got them winning. It's going to be a probably tough game for the first 45 minutes, but I think Leicester find a way to break them down and win this one in the end and grab all 3 points. Moving on, another 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Over in Britain game. Brighton at Manchester City. Manchester City leads the all-time series 13-4-5. Only about 22 meetings between the two teams all time. Only 4 meetings in the Premier League between the two, and all of them have happened since 2017 when Brighton came up, in which Man City is undefeated and has not lost a game to Brighton since they came up, undefeated in the Premier League and undefeated in total meetings. So it's hard to see Man City losing, especially since they haven't lost a game to Brighton since I believe it's 2008. So that's going to be an interesting one. Along with that, Brighton did play in the FA Cup this week. So they had a 2-1 win at Bristol this week. Will that play a factor in them playing against Man City? Will they be tired? That one will be that'll be interesting and to look out for as well. Brighton has looked good this year. Let's not forget that they have the 3-0 win at Watford, a draw against West Ham, and then the loss to Southampton last week, which they had a red card in. But even in the draw against West Ham, they looked very, very dangerous and looked like they could score some goals. So they might give Man City a little bit of a test. It might be snug, but I think that this one is a Man City win as well. Again, the thing with Man City is they have so much firepower, so much talent across the board that it's hard to see them losing games or even dropping points to teams like Brighton, who have looked very good but just don't have that talent across the board. Looking now at Norwich at West Ham, which is the next game, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. over in Britain. These two haven't played since 2016, which makes sense because Norwich hasn't been in the Premier League since then. Norwich only has 2 wins since the start of the Premier League against West Ham, and both of them have been at home. So that's definitely something to look out for, as this one is on the road. Norwich has been one of the more exciting teams to watch, for sure. That exciting game last week against Chelsea, which they could have at least drawn, but a good job by Chelsea of working that one out. And then, of course, their 3-1 win at Newcastle. Really haven't had a terrible half since that 4-1 loss to Liverpool, where they gave up 4 goals in the first half, which is understandable. First game back in the Premier League against a tough side, one of the best sides in the Premier League. you're gonna have a tough time. But now they're going to West Ham, and they got a challenge here. West Ham got things back on track last week with a win at Watford, and I think the Norwich attack is going to be something that West Ham's going to have to deal with, and I think Norwich is not the type of team that's going to back down. I think they're going to send their guys forward, but I think that Norwich. I think it's going to be a tough one. I think it's going to be pretty close. I think West Ham give them a tough challenge. I think this one could either end in a draw or a win. Well, obviously a draw or a win, but I think it could either end in a draw or a win for Norwich. I think this one's a little bit of an upset. I think Norwich go on the road, get their first win on the road in Premier League play this year. I think they got the firepower, the attack to do it, and I have a hard time seeing West Ham. Not that I have a hard time seeing West Ham win this one, but I just think that Norwich has the firepower to do it, and that's why I'm picking this one as an upset win. Kind of going, a little taking a little chance here with this prediction. Moving on now to Sheffield at Chelsea, which is another 10 a.m. game, 3 p.m. Over there in Britain. The last time these two teams played was 2007. Each team has 3 wins in the Premier League play against each other, so you kind of can't really tell much from the past. Sheffield United has been really solid defensively and it has had a goal in each game, so they've had their production offensively, not a ton, but had enough, and had a decent showing defensively, as they've only given up, I believe, 3 goals total in the 3 Premier League games that they've played. Chelsea, as we just spoke about, squeaked out a win against Norwich, and maybe that gets them back on track in this one. Sheffield United also played in an FA Cup match this past week in which they won 2-1 at Blackburn, so that could also have a factor in the way this game plays out. I think this one will probably be a close one because of Sheffield United's defense, but I think Chelsea get another win on the board, move up to grab another 3 points and take this one overall, especially at home. And then the final 10 a.m. game, 3 p.m. over in Britain on Saturday, is Watford at Newcastle. Two teams who have had their fair share of struggles. Last year they played each other 3 times. They went 1-1-1. So 1 draw, 1 win, 1 loss for each team. Watford is 6-3-1 in their last 10 meetings versus Newcastle, but they've looked awful this season. They have not looked good at all. I believe they're one of the only teams, if not the only team, to not have any points so far this year. They've looked awful, and there's really no 2 ways about it. Newcastle coming off that big win against Tottenham. Other than that, haven't played really well or exceptionally well. Had that loss at Norwich in week 2. So this is going to be an interesting one in the sense that I don't think either of these teams are really that good. I think we're probably going to see a lot of poor soccer here. But Watford really need to get off the board here. They need at least a point. And I think that's what they get here today in this one. I think they get a draw, and I think that's how this one plays out. I can't see Newcastle losing to Watford just because of how bad Watford have played, but I definitely can see a draw in this one because I don't think either of these teams are that great. Moving on to the final game on Saturday, it's Liverpool at Burnley, the 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time game, 5:30 over in Britain or in England. Liverpool are the only undefeated team left. They're 8-1-1 against Burnley in their last 10, undefeated in the last 4, 3-1-0. Burnley look solid this year. They played some good defense. They scored a couple goals, had a big win in week 1 against Southampton. But I don't think they have enough attack to win this one. Liverpool have looked fantastic from start to finish. No hiccups really at all yet. Just that one not so great performance against Southampton, but still got the win. Burnley did play an FA Cup match this week, but didn't play many of their starters. So it shouldn't have too much of a factor in this game. It's not going to matter anyway. Liverpool win this one, I think, pretty easily. Probably like a 3-1 scoreline as they get another win and stay atop the Premier League table for one more week. Moving on to Sunday, as we start to wrap things up here, 2 games on Sunday. The first of them being Wolves at Everton, 9 a.m. Eastern time. I believe it's 2 o'clock over there in England. Wolves are 2-5-3 in the last 10 meetings, all of them Premier League meetings against Everton. But last year they won 3-1 at Goodison, which is where the game will be played. They also drew 2-2 at home, which was the first game of the Premier League season, the first game back in the Premier League for them. So have had some recent success against Everton. Both teams have looked pretty average. The thing about Wolves that's interesting is they came in and they played 2 pretty difficult teams to start off the season. And then in this, in their last game, they played a Burnley team that they probably should have beat at home. Granted, we just talked about Burnley, how solid they've been. But I feel like Wolves should have won that game. I feel like we haven't seen too much attacking firepower or finishing from them. A great goal and a penalty have been the reason they drew their last 2 games against Man United and Burnley. Kind of getting lucky in both of those. Although in the Man United game, they dominated that second half, so they probably deserved that one. Everton's coming off a terrible loss to Aston Villa. They've won their only home game this year, which was against Watford, so not really much saying there. I think that with this one, Everton did play a midweek match in the FA Cup against Lincoln City where they won 4-2. Pretty taxing match as they were. It was tied pretty late in this one. So that could definitely play a factor in this one. And if Wolves win this, I think that could be a reason why. But I think this one comes out as a draw. I think it finishes all square. And that's how each team gets a point, and Wolves still looking for their first win after this one. As an Everton fan, I'll probably be happy with that result. I would like a win, but I definitely don't want a loss. And this is a game that they could lose. I think Wolves. It's only a matter of time before they break out, so we'll see how it plays out. But Everton really need to get things going. Wolves both need to get things going as well. Both have points, but not enough for their standards so far this season, considering who they played. Moving on now to the final game, Tottenham at Arsenal, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, 4:30 p.m. over in England. The North London Derby, the best match of the week, easily the best match on paper. Arsenal lost their only real test against Liverpool last week, 3-1. While Tottenham managed to get a point in their only real test at Man City. 2-2 in week 2, but Tottenham also had a terrible loss last week against Newcastle. Looked absolutely awful. And that's, not ideal considering they haven't looked fantastic all season. The 2-2 draw against Man City, they gave up like 30 shots in that game. It didn't control much of possession. In the Aston Villa game, it took them to the last 15 minutes of the game to score all 3 of their goals and really take control of the game. And in the last game, they gave up an early goal and couldn't figure anything out after that. In the last 5 Premier League meetings between these two, Tottenham is 2-1-2, so versus Arsenal. So both of those losses actually came at Arsenal. So pretty even here in the last 5 meetings. But just so you're taking a look, as this game will be at the Emirates, the last time Tottenham went to Arsenal and won in Premier League play was back in November of 2010. As they won that game 3-2. Other than that, they're 0-3-5 in Premier League play since then, and only have 1 win as they were 1-3-6 in their last 10 games at Arsenal, which is since the 2010 win. So not a lot of happiness happening at the Emirates in recent memory for Tottenham fans. And I think the thing we got to look out for in this one, for Tottenham specifically, is if they start Eriksen. That's going to determine the entire game, determine what happens overall in this game. The 2 games that they didn't start Eriksen, they gave up early goals. They fought back in one of them. The other one they did not, and did not have enough time as after they got Eriksen on in, I believe, the 60th minute last week. But when you look at Arsenal, they haven't looked really that convincing either. They still managed to grab all 6 points from games that they should have won, which is better than you can say for Tottenham. But they haven't looked convincing. So it's going to be interesting for sure. But I think a lot of this relies on Eriksen. Just a couple things on Arsenal. They haven't used Lacazette, Aubameyang, and Pepe to start a game yet this season. Will they do it this week? That's something to look out for. And then, for Arsenal to win this game and come out with a win, they're going to need to be good defensively, which has been a problem for them pretty much all year and probably will be a problem for them all year. They are missing Bellerin and Tierney, who are two of their more solid defensive players, so a little bit of an excuse there. And then Ceballos is going to have to play better for Arsenal this week. Played pretty bad last week. Who Scored gave him a 5.6 Who Scored rating. So not a great showing against Liverpool. He's going to have to be better this week to break down Tottenham defensively. But I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. Tottenham the game is decided, I think, between whether Eriksen plays, and it's probably decided in the midfield between Eriksen and Ceballos. I think those two players have a significant impact on this game. My personal opinion is this one ends in a draw, but I can see it. Never know with these derbies. Anything can happen in these derbies. So we'll see how that one plays out, but I have it as a draw. I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched, and I think the defense on Arsenal may cost them in this one, cost them 3 points, and give Tottenham a point in the draw. So there you have it. That is the preview for this week. That's everything you need to know about match week 4. Hopefully that answered all your questions, and going in, hopefully you can understand what's going on a little bit better, and you can have a little bit of an idea of what to look out for going into match week 4. Guys, keep liking, following, listening, subscribing, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Tell your friends, tell everybody about it. And I look forward to talking to you guys again next week after match week 4. Peace.